Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Well, I'm very pleased to be here with lots of colleagues and, more important thing, friends, because most of you are also very good friends. So it's a pleasure for me to share with you some of the reflections that I would like to do today. So which is our current context? Well, first of all is the context, and this is not new now, of the European higher education area, so it will condition us in the way that how we have to consider assessment in that. We are also in the context of the knowledge and information society, so some things are not as they were in the past 50, 60 years, for instance. And third, we are in a context that is ICT intensive, both hybrid in some cases, in most of the cases, and with some virtual learning environments that are also working in some other particular contexts. So there are two key words that are, or two key ideas underlying this, and one is, as the European Commission uses to remind us, is modernization of higher education, and we are in that trend, and the other one is digital transformation that we are talking about today too. So we try to transform, and this is the word that is leading us, leading our discussion, but the same context is also very reluctant to change. Well, as Andrea also mentioned, we should think on the purpose of assessment. If we are thinking on a diagnostic assessment, the purpose of our assessment is to identify the needs of that students, of that program, and so on. If you are focusing on the formative assessment, we probably will try to provide information and progression levels in order to keep the students informed about which is this progression, which are their strengths and their weaknesses. And finally, we have the summative assessment that has as a purpose certification or accreditation. One of the main problems we have is that too often formative and summative, that has to be complementary, are completely different and separated. And one doesn't talk to each other. So formative inside the classroom, we are doing things and so on, and someone will take an examination in order to accredit or certificate. And there is no link, no relationship, or at least there is not enough link or relationship. So talking about traditional assessment models, they, when we are getting into these digital environments of the universities, we find that most of the assessment practices are usually responding to a transmissive way of teaching. Even if we organize seminars, if we organize discussion groups, if we organize all these kind of very active things for our students, at the end, our assessment way is to go back to these traditional assessment models, because are the ones that will make us confident enough on the final results, because we can be compared with others. So most of these traditional assessment models, we can do a list, I didn't do that, are quantitative models, because they are related to a very positivist approach of assessment, and in fact a positivist approach of education. So we should decide which is really our approach, if it is so focused or maybe not. So then we will need to open up and to widen our approach to assessment in order to take into consideration other approaches too. So one of these considered more newer traditional assessment models is to use the biometric measurement tools in order to control what the students are going to do, even if they are not face-to-face in front of us. These systems, however, will provide us a means for being a bit sure about the fact that people is the one that they consider to be, and they have to be, when are taking an examination. Some of the automatic assessment tools are classified by their specialization, and some, making an analysis of the literature on that topic, we can see that there are three main types of tools depending on their specialization. One is the one that are specialized in contests, because most of these tools try to be more amusing for the student than it was a traditional examination. So some are specialized in contests, others in quizzes, and others in software testing that can be quite automatic, in the sense that you can make a program, and then the software can test if the program is okay, if there are some mistakes, and can inform you about which are the mistakes it has found, so it informs you about that in order to improve your performance. Some recent research also shows which are the strengths and the weaknesses of these automatic assessment tools. So I made this chart in order to know which are the types of tool and which are the strengths and the weaknesses. So another important thing in order to think that this framework of assessment, of policy assessment, is considering that there are different levels in not only in learning, but in the application, in the transferability of learning. And usually the traditional assessment strategies are focusing on the two first stages of this process. These two first stages is to know, so this test try to know if you know what you need to know, and if you know how to tell about it, because you can be asked to present an essay, for instance. But the new strategies should focus more on performance, as you mentioned too. And it would be about to show how to do it, and more specifically, do it. In order to finalize, to talk about assessment models is just to be based, and I would not like to repeat what you said because I perfectly agree on it, is that the alternative assessment models are mainly performance-based, try to develop authentic situations in order to evaluate what these situations can provide, and most of them are more based on qualitative models. When I mean most of them is because there are some of them that are not, so the approach is more interpretative. The general idea is that we can widen a little bit what the 20th century assessment approaches or strategies has been based on tests, written essays, theoretical problems, dossiers, laboratories, and so on, and widen them a little bit in the 21st century using other practices. And I'm just going to mention them too, because also Andrea mentioned them very well. One is self-assessment as a matter to know where you are in the process of learning, and peer assessment that I also use in my courses, but also other things like digital portfolios, like virtual labs, practice-based assessment that is going to be fed with digital elements, authentic problem solving, and so on and so on. So at the end, we should take into consideration that the strategies and the assessment for learning are going to share learning expectations with the students, between themselves and with the students and the professors. They have to try eliciting evidence, because this is one of the most important things. So would we have evidence of that learning? How we will do it? How we will get this evidence? Is the student who will provide this evidence is about me, that I will take it from some place? This is one very interesting idea, and very, very important feedback, because any kind of assessment has to provide a good feedback to the students in order to be really productive. So at the end, this is difficult to be read from here, but this is just an example of which are the diversity of assessment strategies that we can use. and most of them can be easily adapted to online learning environments. But if I ask all of you which have been the assessment strategies you've used in your teaching practice along your life, we probably will finish here with, let's say, between 10 and 15 strategies. So we are always doing the same. Why not open up our minds in order to consider that there are other alternatives that can be easily applied also using the power of digital transformation in our institutions? So not new words about digital portfolios and rubrics, trying to develop a kind of ecosystem of data and information that will be useful both for the students and for the teachers to make decisions about the progress of the students, and the students themselves in order to know what they have really learned in that process and which is the lack of learning that they need to cover in the very next future. So at the end, ICTs do not have to replicate traditional assessment methods, but help to carry out more innovative approaches. So to finalize, which is our assessment policy? Have we thought about that in our institutions? Are we ready to change that in a much modern, or considering what the digital transformation is giving us in this sense? And the last question, again, are we assessing what we would like to assess? Thank you very much.